Hello, everybody. This is our third practicing Stoicism video, and unfortunately, the software I was using for the previous two does not seem to be working, so I'm going to do this on Zoom. Remember, this week we are doing sections 8 through 13 in the handbook, and whenever you read these, I would say just go back to section 1 and just kind of remind yourself of what some of the things are that Epictetus has said early on that we should be thinking about, practicing. The first thing, remember, is just very much in section 1. He says some things are up to us while others are not. Right? That's sort of the basic principle that Ado was talking about in the reading we discussed in class today. There's all sorts of practices and habits you can, if you can kind of get that basic thought into how you approach life, how you approach things in the world, the Stoics claim this will allow you to live a better life. Remember the way he put it is he said, if you do this, no one will ever put pressure on you. No one will impede you. You won't reproach anyone. You won't blame anyone. Sounds pretty good. You have a pretty good life here. And if you want to cultivate that outlook, one of the key things he says you should do is to make it your habit to tell every jarring impression you have, you are just an appearance and in no way the real thing. So sort of get in the habit of distinguishing between how the world appears to you and your judgment of how it actually is. Right? If you can separate those two things, you will begin to make progress, as he says. And remember, many of the remarks we've been looking at and thinking about concern regulating our desires and our aversions, the things that we strongly want and the things that we strongly don't want, right? So not that we won't ever have preferences. We can prefer some things and we can prefer not having others, but it's those strong desires and aversions, those things that we're basically, our whole sense of whether we're doing well or not is bound up with getting these things. And the Stoics are trying to get us to narrow, redirect, basically get our desires and our aversions so that they are only pointed at things that they think are truly good and truly bad. Many of the remarks we've been looking at have to do with regulating aversion. And we'll see that some of the ones this week continue that theme. The first one, remark 8, is quite short. It just tells you to not to ask for things to happen as you would like them to, right? Because guess what? If you ask for things to happen a certain way and they don't, you're going to be disappointed. Instead, what you're supposed to do is wish that things happen as they actually do. If you do that, you'll be okay. This is something you have to cultivate in yourself, right? And basically, this is tied to the Stoics' idea of a perspective on nature, right? Things happen the way they actually do. If you can just accept that many things happen outside of your control, if you can accept that's how they're going to happen, you're on your way. And remember, for the Stoics, this is tied to the divine rational order. Like they think the gods have set things up to be a certain way. And if you could get your frame of mind whereby you say, yes, things are going to happen the way they happen, you're making progress. Okay. One way to think about that then is you're kind of protecting yourself against certain disturbing passions, right? You're sort of making a positive wish. You're sort of saying, hey, instead of kind of wishing for things not to go a certain way, you're sort of saying, however they go, I'll be fine. But remember, that's not an easy thing, Epictetus says. It's a difficult achievement. Similarly, remark 9 looks at a couple of additional things that we might be averse to. One of them is getting sick. Another is lameness in our leg. These are things that Epictetus says, hey, what you need to do here is distinguish between the body on the one hand and yourself on the other, right? Um, that also takes practice. Tell yourself this, he says, right? Tell yourself that when sickness occurs, it's an impediment to the body, but not to the will. When lameness occurs, it's an impediment to the leg, but not to the will. So you are learning to talk to yourself in a different way. Your internal narrative, the way you orient yourself, the way you describe what's happening, the things that affect you as opposed to the things that belong to you, in one sense of belonging, like your body. Those things are outside of your control. They're not impediments to you. And if you learn to tell yourself that, then you will, again, be making progress. Okay, how about section 10? This is a case where where Epictetus, again, points out a number of things that you might find difficult to deal with, and says, learn to ask yourself what resources you have. So this seems like actually a good general piece of advice. Whenever you are struggling with something, right? Something comes up in your life that seems hard. He says, make it a habit to ask yourself the question, what do I have in me? What have the God's given me that will help me to deal with this situation? And he gives quite a few examples, I think, just to sort of get the ball rolling, right? If you encounter somebody that you strongly sexually desire, and you think it's inappropriate, maybe you're married and this is not your partner. You can ask yourself, what resources do I have to deal with that? Epictetus says the answer is self-control. Or, for example, you are in pain. You have endurance. Somebody's rude to you. You have patience. And he says, if you develop these habits, like these habits of just sort of asking yourself, the more general habit is like, what do I have that allows me to deal with this stuff? Then you won't be carried away by your first impression. So this is part of that project of learning how to manage your impressions, right? This is the thing that he says we can all do. This is a skill we can cultivate. And if we learn to do it well, that's going to help us live well. So you might think of this habit as a tool for managing impressions, right? It's something that allows you to resist your judgment that those things are good or bad, right? You see somebody and you think, oh, it would be great to have sex with that person. No, you need to break that habit. Or it would be terrible if I were in pain. No, not true, the Stoics say. Of course, they would prefer not to be in pain, and they might prefer to be having sex, but the point is you're trying to break the automatic habitual connection you make between these things that are out in the world that we think of as good and bad. We want to sort of put a stop to that, at least temporarily. Okay, what about remark 11? Here's another case where you are changing how you talk to yourself about things that happen to you. He says, never say about anything, I have lost it, but instead I have returned it. What does that mean? It means things that we lose, well, things that are gone from us, from our life. For example, well, maybe the hardest one, a child. One of your children dies, or your spouse dies, or somebody steals something of yours, somebody breaks something. He says, don't say you've lost it, right? Don't sort of, and what's going on there? You are trying to change how you conceive of these things. When you lose things, it's something that belongs to you, something that's been taken from you, and that's the habit we want to change. Instead, we need to train ourselves to speak in this other way. Think of this not as something that was yours that you lost or that was taken, but as something that was entrusted to you temporarily, something that the gods lent to you and that they are entitled to ask for whenever they want, however they see fit, and you don't have to understand why, right? Um, that's a real shift in how we think about these things. That would be if somebody lent you something, then of course you would want to take good care of it. You'd want to be responsible. And changing in this way doesn't mean that you won't continue to be committed to these things, care for them, for these people, that you won't practice the right duties. It just means that how you relate to the end of such a thing, a person or an object, will shift, right? Will change. And it's also a way of just kind of reminding you that these are not literally yours, right? So it's not, you haven't been harmed if someone else's life comes to an end. You may not prefer that that happen, and obviously you might feel sad, but there's still this sort of basic sense in which when we react as strongly the way that we do, it's because we misconceive our relationship to those things, or at least that's what the Stoics think. Okay, how about now for sections 12 and 13, the last two remarks of this week, I would say there's a little bit of a change. Epictetus steps back a bit, right? In the previous, say, remarks 3 through 11, he's been focusing on managing specifically our aversions, right? What we are averse to. He's been working on that. And now instead, he says, hey, let's take a look more generally about how to make progress. Remember, this idea of making progress is one of the descriptions for living a better life, living this transitional life, living as a philosophy student, living as a philosopher. And what he says is you need to reject certain kinds of reasoning if you're going to make progress, if you're going to live more in this way, right? So stop, again, saying certain things to yourself. Stop thinking in certain ways. Don't say to yourself, if I neglect my business, I will have nothing to live on. Don't say, if I don't punish my slave, or we could say servant or worker or what have you, he will be no good. What's going on here? This is a case where people are thinking that their well-being is tied to how things are going in the outside world, whether it's business matters or how someone else is behaving. That's what we're trying to break. And what Epictetus claims is, if you are able to stop reasoning in this way, certain qualities of mind will come about, are possible. Like, so the Stoic will improve their quality of mind. And he mentions 4 qualities. One of them is not getting worked up, which could also be translated as being without passion. Another is tranquility, which could be also free from disturbance. The third one is being calm, free from distress, being confident, free from fear. So these are all qualities that if you have the right outlook, the Stoics claim, then this is how you will go forward. And this is a case where Epictetus says, like with some of his earlier training suggestions, start with small things, right? You got to build this up, right? So start with something like oil being spilled or some wine being stolen, not a major thing, but do that. And then he says, tell yourself. So talk to yourself, say, hey, this is the price one pays for not getting worked up. The price for tranquility. Nothing comes free of charge. So what are you doing? You're sort of saying, hey, these things happen and I will just kind of let them go so that I can maintain my composure, right? Similarly, if you have somebody who works for you and you know that they're just the kind of person that may not actually end up doing what you want. They may not listen to you. Um, this is another case where he says your tranquility shouldn't depend on that. That's outside of your control, right? That's external. So same thing. Work on cultivating this different frame of mind. All right, last remark for today. Section 13 continues this theme of making progress, right? Um, and here's a case where he says, if you want to make progress, don't mind if you appear foolish or if you appear silly regarding outward things. So like, and similarly, don't wish to appear like an expert. So sometimes we really don't want to look foolish and we really do want to look like we're experts. And he's sort of saying, try to set all of those things aside. Similarly, if people think you're somebody, they like start treating you like a big shot. Don't just be like, oh yeah, I must be. Mistrust yourself, he says. So you got to be cautious. You got to like try to, put those things to one side. And why is that? Why he's sort of warning, he says, hey, look, this is because, and this sort of goes back to something he had discussed earlier. He says, it is not easy to keep your will in harmony with nature and to secure outward things, right? So those are kind of two almost incompatible goals. And we're used to trying to secure outward things, right? The way that the Stoics are reorienting us is to sort of get us to focus on keeping our will in accord with nature, get us to focus on the things that are in our control, that are up to us, and to sort of suggest that only things that are good or bad fall there. If we could do that, then we could get to a better life. But if you do that, he says, if you care about keeping your will in harmony with nature, then inevitably, he says, you will end up neglecting the other thing. And that means you're vulnerable now to appearing foolish, appearing silly. And you sort of almost have to prepare for that and accept that, not get too hung up on that, right? You have to sort of basically work at abandoning the belief that things outside of your control that are not up to you are good and can have genuine value, or bad and can be genuinely harmful. The Stoics claim neither of those things are true, and that only when you can kind of reject those thoughts will you really be able to sort of stay focused on keeping your will in harmony with nature, managing your impressions, so on and so forth. Okay, that's it for now. I hope you guys have a good week. I hope you keep reading and rereading the handbook and carrying it about with you, and just sort of stopping on occasion, looking around, asking yourself, noticing things. Can you find examples that that might illustrate some of the different passages that we've been reading and thinking about? Look for them. Maybe write about them in the Digital Stoa. Write about them in your philosophy journal. Okay, see you guys next week.